There are more than 4,000 aircraft parked here at the Boneyard. Taken together, these planes would make up the second largest air force in the entire world. But most of these planes will never fly again. They're here to serve a different purpose. The Boneyard is where the Air Force and every other U.S. government agency sends their decommissioned airplanes to be taken apart, reused in other aircraft, or turned over to the Defense Reutilization and Marketing Office to be sold as scrap. The reclamation process at AMARG is able to extract the very last tax dollars from these aircraft after they've reached the end of their useful operational lives. It's a mission that's been helping save taxpayers money since the end of World War II.
Shortly after the Second World War, there were huge quantities of surplus aircraft scattered all over the world. A lot of them were scrapped where they were in theater, depending on the types. Other airframes were identified as having value for potential future use, or there just wasn't enough capacity in the overseas theaters to dispose of them as required. So a lot of them were ferried back here. In particular at Arizona, a lot of B-17s, B-24s, and B-25s were all located here. And the 50s was kind of a unique golden age of jet flight and propeller flight. There was an enormous diversity of aircraft being used by the Air Force, some more successfully than others. So a lot of them were rapidly outclassed and made obsolete. So, you know, entire production runs of aircraft were brought here for reclamation, like F-84s, B-36s, whereas others were brought here for storage and regeneration. A lot of B-29s were stored here after World War II, and they were pressed back into service for Korea. So up until the early 60s, AMARC was principally an Air Force facility. The Navy and the Marine Corps maintained their own facility up outside Phoenix at Litchfield Park. But that was closed up, I think, in 1962, and all those assets transferred down here. So since that time, this has been the complete storage facility for government aircraft. So you find NASA aircraft over there, you find Coast Guard aircraft, Border Patrol, Navy, Marine, Reserve units, training units. We have a lot of unique airframes here, a lot of one-of-a-kinds or few-of-a-kinds. Behind us here, there's a B-36 Peacemaker. It's special. It is the last production one ever built by Convair. Came off the assembly line in 1958, flew for 2 years, retired out in Fort Worth. It's one of only 4 existing airframes out of nearly 400 built. One of my personal favorites is the Boeing B-52A Stratofortress. It's the oldest Buff in existence, serial number 3, third one off the production line. It was the principal test airframe and carrier mothership for the X-15 program. So nearly all of the early Gemini, Mercury, and Apollo astronauts all dropped off of our B-52A in the X-15 program. The recently deceased Neil Armstrong was a participant of that program and dropped off our airplane. So it's, to my eyes, it's kind of reeking in history. I really love it.
As the Air Force has evolved, so has the Boneyard. During the Cold War, America's determination to outpace the Soviet Union in the space race helped fuel an explosion of technological advancement. Almost as quickly as they were introduced, U.S. military aircraft were regularly phased out as newer aircraft flew faster, higher, and farther. The outmoded airplanes were sent here, and the Boneyard's inventory began to swell. With the Vietnam War came a renewed call for even more advanced bombers and fighters. By the time that war started to wind down in 1973, the Boneyard's fleet had reached an all-time high of more than 6,000 aircraft. Today, some 4,000 aircraft still sit in the Boneyard, in various stages of the reclamation process. But the inventory here, much like in today's Air Force, is destined to change.
You know, as our Air Force becomes more and more technologically reliant, fewer and fewer different types of airframes are being produced. I would expect probably in 20 or 25 years, you'd probably see less than 1,000 aircraft over there, and looking out 40 years, there may not be a need for such a large facility. There will always be a need for the facility, but whether or not you're going to find fleets of KC-135s or fields of F-15s, Probably not. You know, there's 200 some odd F-22s. You know, the F-35 hasn't even really come into full operational service yet, so I wouldn't expect to see any of them even twinkling at retirement for 35 or 40 years. You know, but there's probably several hundred of them, so it's not going to be the same vast, diverse fleet that you see now. So, you know, it is kind of the end of a golden age, you know.
Over the course of its more than 60-year history here in the American Southwest, AMARG has become something of an aviation enthusiast's mecca.
Wherever you go in the world, anybody who kind of is interested in aviation or airplanes at all, if you mention Tucson, you know, their eyes light up and go, oh, that's where the boneyards are, right? Yeah, that's where the boneyards are.
And the boneyards are here for a very good reason. Turns out the desert climate here in Tucson provides an ideal environment for long-term storage of these aircraft, with very little risk of corrosion or other damage from the elements.
The ground we're on here is fairly unique. It's a very high calcium soil, very stable. When it's dry as it is now, it's as hard as concrete and very, very, very robust. And with the dry weather conditions here, low relative humidity year-round, very low rainfall, averaging about 6 to 8 inches a year in the region. There's nothing like tornadoes or hurricanes or that type of thing here to potentially destroy assets. So Tucson was identified as an ideal location for an active reclamation facility.
And that year-round sunshine also makes this an ideal location for people to come visit and experience Air Force history in person. Normally, when someone wants to get a good look at some military aircraft, they have to do it through binoculars. But here at the Boneyard, you can get up close and personal with everything from fighters, bombers, tankers, lifters, just about everything the Air Force has flown in the last half-century.
Our visitors almost universally enjoy the sense of adventure they feel coming out here in the desert to look at airplanes. We don't rope off our airplanes outside. People are free to get up and stick their head in the wheel well, bump their heads on a propeller, trip over a tie-down cable, run from rattlesnakes. You know, it's the authentic desert experience out here. And it's a big part of our charm and our appeal. One of our sort of taglines is, you know, where you can touch history, and we embrace that.
So it's not all just about tearing down old aircraft as newer technology makes them obsolete. Preserving Air Force history has become like a secondary mission at the Boneyard. Along with the Pima Air and Space Museum right across the street, AMARG serves as a sort of monument to the accomplishments and innovations of the past, hoping to inspire America's future pilots, aircraft engineers, and astronauts.
You know, our next generation of aerospace innovators, for all you know, could be wandering around here this weekend, getting that whiff of hydraulic fluid. If we can expose and encourage young people to come out and challenge themselves and find a direction through what we do here, however little, I think it's important work.
Time and technology march on. The Boneyard will continue in its mission, taking custody of outdated aircraft, salvaging and reusing every part possible. But except for the small handful of aircraft that are preserved for posterity, once a certain model of jet fighter or helicopter or long-range bomber is gone, it's gone forever.
A common misconception that a lot of people have with AMARC is that there's still World War II aircraft over there. You know, we more often than you think, we do get emails or phone calls from people doing family history or have heard legend through one of their uncles or cousins that, oh yeah, there's a boneyard out in Arizona that's got all these World War II aircraft out there. So they call wondering if their grandfather's B-24 is still parked across the street there, and we have to generally explain to them, no, I'm afraid not. I mean, it was turned into beer cans probably 60 years ago. So the idea that a lot of people have is that the boneyard is really a boneyard, like a graveyard, where it's a very static kind of place where nothing happens. It's just a big, you know, I don't know, like some hillbilly farm in the middle of Texas with 400 old tractors laying there. It's anything but, as you may have seen. It's a very heavily engaged, dynamic, busy organization that's tasked with supporting, you know, the mission of the United States Air Force and its allies. And that's a huge amount of work.
For today's Air Force from Tucson, Arizona, I'm Tech Sergeant Nicholas Kurtz.
We're bringing this airplane here. It's its last flight. It's being retired from service in the Air Force to the Boneyard. It's flown over 20,000 hours, delivered cargo all over the world. It's a sad day seeing this airplane being put to rest. But it has had a long life since it's been flying since 1969.
What we came here to do is deliver this two-ship of B-1s to the AMARG. We're sad to see them go. They've been great workhorses, but it's time to put them to sleep. And so we flew in here from Dyess Air Force Base, the 9th Bomb Squadron. We're sad to see her go. She's been a great asset and really good at helping us defend our nation.
You got it, senor.
One of the things that I talk about when I get a chance to talk to the employees of AMARG is I talk about what we do here. Do we store airplanes? We sure do. But that's not what's important about us for the Department of Defense. The most important thing we do is support the warfighter through different technologies and through different operations. We have 5 major processes that we do here. The first is storage, which most people are familiar with, taking an airplane, preserving it here and keeping it in the desert for future use.
Our role is to preserve incoming aircraft. Well, we first started out by taping up all the seams of the engine. That's what we're working on, the B-52 back here behind me. And then after that, we sprayed the first coat of rubberized coating, basically to prevent dust and bird intrusion from getting into the engines and trying to keep them as clean as possible.
Most people think we store aircraft just to get rid of them later, but a large number of the aircraft go through what's called regeneration, where we will take them and we will return them to flyable status in order to use them for different programs. For example, we're regenerating F-4s that are used as drones so that our pilots can shoot live missiles at them to identify whether or not they would have been able to hit a target in combat.
These aircraft that were produced in 66, 67, 68, 69, you're rebuilding the aircraft that was made almost 40 years ago and has spent the last 20 years sitting in the desert in storage. So it's a tremendous task to take that airplane out of the desert, rebuild it, and then get it back into flying shape. At least 40% of what we use to regenerate this aircraft will come from another F-4 that's sitting out in the desert.
Each and every day we reclaim about 50 parts off of the aircraft here and send them to keep the aircraft fleet that they have right now current and flying.
We have tons of great parts out here and no sense in letting them go to waste. So 90% of the stuff we pull is just as good as anything as a brand new part. It's just dirty. There's very few parts that I've pulled since I've been out here that were deemed bad.
There is a savings of dollars when we reclaim parts from here at the boneyard, but that's not actually the biggest benefit. The biggest benefit is the largest number of parts we reclaim cannot be bought.
There we go, and that's our job in a nutshell.
And therefore, if without the parts that we reclaim here at the boneyard, we'd stop flying. So it's not as much about money, it's about mission. And the mission would stop if we stop reclaiming parts from here.
Yep, that's it. Yeah.
For the most part, we just pull parts and send them in all day, you know, one after another. It's a great job.
So a lot of different things occur here all the time. We also do a little bit of disposal, taking aircraft that nobody has a need for anymore within the entire federal government and actually getting rid of them, cutting them up into tiny pieces and getting rid of them.
And it takes a total about, for C5, processing and shipping out about a week. We're demilling the fuselage of the C5. Basically what we do is we just tear it down, we shred it up, and then we send it off to refineries to be processed into other materials.
I can see we're driving down the road and some of the aircraft and missing wings and missing the canopy. They think, yeah, it's a junkyard or the boneyard. Yeah, but they don't realize that missing wing might be flying in another aircraft. That missing cockpit window could be in another aircraft. Some of us retired military think that that's it, we don't do nothing else, but no, we continue with our mission, helping out the younger soldiers one way or another accomplish their mission.
The Boeing YAL Airborne Laser Testbed Weapon System now sits decommissioned at the 309th Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, Arizona. A C-5 Galaxy aircraft sits motionless while clouds pass overhead as it waits to be taken apart. Rows of F-15 Eagles and F-16 Fighting Falcons are stored and preserved. This allows them to be recalled into active service within 72 hours if needed. The F-4 Phantom II, which served as the principal air superiority fighter for the Air Force for over 20 years, has been a resident of the Boneyard since 1996. And that's Photos from the Boneyard. I'm Staff Sergeant Michael Brady.
Coming up, we'll meet airmen who flew these aircraft and their special connection with the Boneyard when today's Air Force returns.
My name is Larry G. Right now you're in the F-4 drone production hangar. A drone is an unmanned aircraft that is flown by a man on the ground by way of radar and radio signals. We produced our F-4C models and F-4E models to become full-scale aerial targets. We tear them apart, and we put them back together. We make them flyable. We take 2 flights to produce it, and then we send it to Mojave, where it receives a drone package and becomes a full-scale target. It's a tremendous task, but we have had several aircraft come through here where members are working on them used to crew them. My aircraft actually came through here. I actually missed aircraft tail number 1197. I crewed it while I was at Clark Air Base.
It's about 5,000 planes that are in the process of being decommissioned and taken apart to where you can see behind me to this point to where we get to cut it up. We're demilling the fuselage of a C-5. Basically what we do is we just tear it down, shred it up, and then we send it off to refineries to be processed into other materials. Right here, the C-5 here takes about 4 days of work to cut down and to process. Just what we do is we shred it down and then we just ship it to refineries. And I just cut it into areas that I feel like it would be easiest for me to handle. I just break it.
From the outside it's ugly, and from the inside it's absolutely beautiful. To me it's a piece of history, a big piece of history. The times that we've had with the airplanes and the time in the military are probably the peak of intensity. And as you grow, and I'll say older and more mature, you learn to accept those things and to treasure them.
As you look around, you see there are not many lights. All you have is the stars and the ghosts and the shadows of these airplanes out here.
Transmit 1, got a line 12 o'clock.
I like to think of some of them as having real lives, because if you could get the airplane to tell you the whole story, all the adventures that it was on, all the times that it performed its mission, and maybe the various pilots that flew the airplane, you'd have a real book that would be interesting.
You can't get around an airplane without being drawn into your past. Mostly remembering what happened to you, either while you're getting shot at or just trying to learn how to fly an airplane. It stays with you when you see it again. You remember the people. You get a little sad, but you know, pilots all go west someday.
And that's it for this special edition of Today's Air Force. You can find more in-depth coverage of the Boneyard in the digital edition of Airman Magazine. Just download the free application from iTunes or the Google Play Store. For all of us here at the Air Force Broadcasting Service at Fort Meade, Maryland, I'm Staff Sergeant Shannon O'Fiara. Thanks for watching.